Hi and welcome to the third module of our video presentation on the topic of teamwork. So module number 1 was all about what is teamwork and what goes on in the human brain when teamwork happens. Module 2 was about recruiting for teamwork. Module 3 is all about how to lead for teamwork. So the first thing I want to talk about is what causes people's levels of well-being at work. And you see this diagram. This is a diagram from an article from some time ago by Peter Hart here in Australia, but this is as current today as it was back in 2011. It can be said that employees live in 4 worlds: the world of my job, the world of my team, the world of my leader, and the world of my organisation. And you see that 80%, according to the 2 Peters calculation, 80% of people's well-being comes from my job, my team, and my leader. And my organisation contributes about 20% of people's well-being. Now this says something very important about teamwork, because if you are in a good team and your job, your team, and your leader are all within that team, if you are in a good team, that is going to be an extremely significant help to you from a well-being point of view. And the idea here is this arrow on the left is all about the proximal distal divide. Proximal means things that are close to me. Distal means things that are a long way away from me. And as Yuval Noah Harari would have had it, this idea of the organisation is a myth. It is a concept. It's abstract. Whereas my job, that's very real to me because I do it on a day-to-day basis. My team, well, I interact with my colleagues day by day. And my immediate leader, then that's extremely current to me as well. So the idea is that if you want to increase levels of teamwork, you need to do it team by team. And I think one of the things that sometimes people struggle with is the idea that the solution for team 1 might be different from the solution for team 2. So the idea is that if you want to have high levels of well-being and productivity team by team, you've got to come up with a solution team by team. Now, mission, vision, values concepts often want very cohesive and similar outcomes across an entire organisation. Personally, I think that's a mistake. I think if you think of it clearly, do you really want the same mission, vision, and values for a sales team versus a service provision team versus your accountants? Now, corporate culture is not about mission, vision, and values. Corporate culture is about behaviours. So if you have a lot of positive behaviours in a workplace, then you're going to have then you are going to have a positive corporate culture. If you have a lot of negative behaviours, then you're going to have a negative corporate culture. And it could be said that corporate culture is purely and simply the balance of those positive versus negative behaviours. Now, if that's the case, we have to ask ourselves the question, if behaviours are corporate culture, do we really want our sales reps to behave like our accountants, to behave like our service people? Well, the answer is no, of course, because the behaviours of an accountant should and properly are different from the behaviours of a sales rep. So we have to understand that solutions are team-based, are local, and corporate culture is also local. So let's talk about team development interventions. Team development interventions are a concept of where one seeks to actively improve the teaminess of teams, to cause them to be more cohesive, to cause them to be more effective. And Lacarenza, in a famous article in 2018 with his colleagues, was able to contribute 4 key ideas to how you develop team development interventions. The first is what you might call teamwork, learning and development. In his article, he called it teamwork training. But in a broader sense, it's about teaching people within the team how to be effective team members. And there are some skills associated with that, there are some attitudes associated with that, and there are certainly behaviours associated with that. Teamwork, learning and development. Then there's the question of leadership development and what type of leaders can cause teams to be more effective. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as I work my way through the following material, because we do look at the question of leadership and leadership development. Then there's a question of team building activities. And I want to make a really important point here. The best team building activities are not bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, things that are away from the workplace. The most effective team building activities are in fact where people get together to make their job and their workplace better. You can't beat that for a team building activity. It's sometimes said that a motivational speech lasts as long as it takes to get to the car park and discover that you've got a flat tire. High quality leadership and team development activities take place at the workplace. And in adult learning, there's a rule called the 80-20 rule, which says that 80% of the things that matter you learn on the job. And development, well-being, that's exactly the same. If you want that to work well, then you've got to do stuff that improves the job and improves the workplace. So send people away for bungee jumping if you want, but don't be surprised if they come back, and yes, their human relationships will have changed so much, but will that really have solved the problems at work? I think that if you target people's attention on and empower them to fix things at work, not only will that fix things, which is a good outcome in its own right, but it will also cause them to coalesce more. It will draw people together. So that's a really powerful form. Then we have the team regularly meeting to see what's worked and plan the future. Now, Lacarenza and colleagues called this debriefing. I think it goes further than that though. Debriefing sounds to me like something that could be regarded as being a kind of an activity of seeing what went wrong, what went right. I think this is very future-focused activity. Those of you who saw video 1 in this sequence will have heard me talking about new brain, old brain divide. And the new brain is the part of the brain that can see the future, but it's also the part of the brain that is able to bring emotions like collaboration and goodwill. And it's also a very strategic part of the brain. In other words, people can think up new and creative ways of doing things. That's a new brain divide. So I would suggest that when you do your activities to cause the team to coalesce, have a real future focus with them, because that will cause people to be strategic, but it will also mean that you run less risk of turning on the negative parts of the brain, which are things like the amygdala, which will cause people to be much more likely to be angry, fearful, and depressed. The sort of fight, flight, freeze response that you get out of the amygdala. So we suggest that you undertake these 4 things as team development interventions. Now, if that sounds a little bit abstract, I'm actually going to show you a methodology for team development interventions, which is something that SACS has invented and used with a range of clients. And by the way, if you see this video and you're interested, drop us a note and we will provide you with a pro forma of that piece of material. Leadership. Now, it's all about local leadership. When we run topics like this, people ask me all the time about change management. And the answer is that change management is at its worst where it's undertaken at a corporate level, where as a corporation we seek to do things. And the reason that that's ineffective is because you're giving away the proximal effect. Proximal is my local workplace. Good change management activities are not top-down. They're top-down and bottom-up at the same time. From a top-down point of view, the organisation has the right to and should set an agenda in terms of what sort of outcomes that need to be achieved at a corporate level. But then if you really want change to happen, what you've got to do is empower each team to come up with ways that they can service that corporate need. The more involved people are, the more engaged they will be, and the more empowered they are, the more enthusiastic they will be about owning the solution. That's how you avoid it becoming a sort of a top-down versus bottom-up fight. Sometimes we talk about layers of impermeability in organisations where the messages come down from the chief executive and they bounce off into space. They hit a layer of impermeability. In change management, what you've got to do is get every team involved, and if you do that, you've got a chance of changing the organisation quickly because each team changes. So let's talk about local leadership, and this is a piece of research from our partnership with Deakin University. We undertook this piece of research going back in 2015. We measured the levels of engagement of about 2,700 people across Australia and New Zealand, and we measured using a thing called the Utrecht Work Engagement Scale, which is an internationally validated measure of engagement. We also measured leadership behaviours, and we measured a lot of them, but statistically about 10 of them, not about, exactly 10 of them came out as being statistically powerful in explaining the levels of engagement of staff. So the model here is we asked people about their levels of engagement, and then we asked them about the behaviours that they saw from their leaders. What this is showing is that about a quarter of the levels of engagement of each staff member was attributable to the leader to whom they directly reported, 25% odd. Now, if that's the case, where does the rest come from? Well, some of it comes from personality. Some people are naturally optimistic and positive and engaged in their work. Some of it comes from their colleagues, and that's where a very, very significant slice of it comes from. The way your colleagues behave has an enormous impact on your well-being and engagement at work. And of course, good leaders, people who exhibit the right behaviours, cause the colleagues to behave in a certain way, and that then causes level of engagement. So leaders have a direct impact, that 25%, but they also have an indirect impact, and so that's where the extra variance comes from in this equation. But through this mathematical process, we were able to identify 4 leader behaviours which seem to be really, really important, and we call these leader behaviours the leader behaviours of what might be called facilitative leadership, where a leader is acting not like a boss, but like a facilitator. And you see the first of these is encourages autonomous decision making. So that's empowerment. If people are empowered by their leader, that is the single most engaging thing that a leader can do. Top-down leadership of its very nature is restrictive of people's levels of engagement and well-being. And the more empowering a leader can be, the more likely it is that the staff will be empowered and will be engaged in what they do. But in addition to that, they do better work. Engagement is measured around the world because it predicts things like volume and quality of work that people are able to produce. The second was being optimistic and positive. And I often say to leaders, you can be anything as a leader apart from negative. Because if you think of where leadership came from in an evolutionary sense, it came in order to provide an organism with an opportunity to have a better future, to be less at risk. And of course, if that's the case, then why would anybody want to follow somebody who is negative, pessimistic, and cynical? And they don't. We know that if you run 360-degree feedback, staff are very unforgiving of negative, pessimistic leaders. Now, what do I mean? Am I talking about don't worry, be happy? Well, no, I'm not. I'm talking about a thing called self-efficacy. The idea of a good leader is that they're a person who has the confidence that the team can get this done. If we stick together, we can achieve here. Nothing will go wrong. You're not saying everything's perfect. You're saying, don't worry, we'll cope. We will get through this together. That's the type of optimism that I'm talking about. You'll notice that the third message here is about being supportive. And most leadership development programs deal with this very handsomely. So being supportive in the sense of, I want to be liked by the staff, I'm going to be kind to them, I'm going to be helpful to them. They're all elements of supportiveness and they're important. And finally, creating a learning environment. And creating a learning environment is really about, I believe, empowering people more than anything. Yes, send them away on courses. Yes, teach them things. But empowerment can be incredibly powerful in causing people to learn. Because if you give them an opportunity to solve problems, then what will happen is that they will be more effective in undertaking those kinds of activities, but they will build their skills and capabilities as well. You also see that there's some stuff here about shared clarity, and if you go back to one of our earlier videos, the one at the start of this process for module number 1, we talked about the power, the neurological power of a shared purpose, and it can be shown to be very, very powerful. So leaders need to do all of these 10, but these ones here are the ones that are most powerful from a leadership development point of view. So a simple way of looking at this is leaders have a number of options about how they might choose to lead. So at the left-hand side, you have top-down, and this is where the leader is acting like a boss. And in the middle, you have where the leader is acting in consultation with staff. Way over on the right here, this is where the leader is acting like a facilitator. Top-down, I will tell you what to do. Now, to be a good leader, of course, you have to do that. You have to be somebody who can say, listen troops, listen Mary Smith, listen Bill Jones, this is something that we all need to do, so please do this. That's good leadership. But if that's your only style of leadership, then that's not optimum. Second is consultation, and that's where you will ask Bill Jones and Mary Smith and everybody else what they think about a particular issue. Then you go back to your office and you decide. And then you communicate to everybody, this is what I have decided. Anybody who's used this style of leadership will know that this is a little fraught, because many people feel if you don't do exactly what they've asked, they'll think that you've actually fooled them, that you've really not consulted them genuinely at all, that you've just decided, and you've decided almost unilaterally. And certainly one of the things that we know is when people do this sort of stuff, when the decision is made in a way that doesn't do what they wanted you to do, they simply think that you've used Model 1 leadership, top-down leadership. Model 3 leadership, facilitation, is where the leader consciously does not make the decision. The leader facilitates a process to cause a group of staff to make the decision. And how I suggest you do this is using small group activities, and I'm going to lead you through a process, a thing that we call an action planning process, where we'll show you a series of steps about how to be a facilitative leader. But the key points are that the leader doesn't make the decision, the leader runs a process, and when the leader has run the process, the staff decide what needs to be done, and then when the staff have decided, and they should decide, I think, by a majority vote, that's what we find most effective. You know, one of the negatives of these types of activities is that sometimes people seek consensus. If people care deeply about this sort of stuff, why would they get consensus? You know, people care deeply and they think deeply and they feel deeply about these things. So how is it likely that you'll get consensus? You get consensus only very often by a thing called consensus by fatigue. And that's where people just get sick of arguing about it, so they give up. It is far better, far cleaner, and far more effective to make it clear to everybody at the start when you run a process like this, we decide on a majority vote, 51% wins. And so what it then becomes is everybody becomes aware of the fact that their job is to convince their colleagues. And if they can't, okay, they get voted down. And that makes the process move along smoothly. And it also means that every time somebody leaves a meeting which has led to a decision, they know that something's going to happen from that meeting. They haven't wasted their time. So good leaders need to be Model 1, Model 2, and Model 3, and they need to choose when to do these things. So the top-down stuff, maybe the best time to do that is when people are new in their jobs, or where there is something that's simply a directive, and the directive could come from the leader, him or herself, or it could come from the board, but it's sensible to say this bit there is no choice in. Consultation, asking people's opinions. I think when you ask people's opinions is that, let's say you ask these 6 people and they all say X, well, clearly you just say, all right, well, it's X, we decide that, there's no negotiation will be entered into. If on the other hand, you ask these 6 people and 3 of them think this and 3 of them think this, and you're not sure, then I think that's a wonderful trigger to go to this model here where you facilitate a process where they decide. Now, if you're going to use facilitative leadership, you can't do it dishonestly. You really need to commit to it. And so if you lead people through a facilitation and you tell them you will go with what they decide, you better be prepared to do that. And from a personal point of view, I've found that a couple of things. 1, my staff come up with brilliant ideas that I would never have thought of. 2, when you do this, they get highly engaged. They see this as being empowering, they see it as being exciting, and they see that as being them being valued. They're being valued for their contribution and the quality of their ideas, and it builds trust. So facilitative leadership is extremely powerful. So if you look at the majority of leaders in Australia and New Zealand, you'll find that they're somewhere between Model 1 and Model 2. They can be a boss and they can be a consultant. Very few are used to the idea of facilitation. So I'd be saying if you want to have a team intervention, a team development intervention that causes the team to be much more cohesive, this kind of an approach where a leader becomes confident and skilled in facilitating rather than deciding can be extremely powerful, because when you do this, you're causing the team to become less reliant on the leader. You're causing the team to become far more independent in the way that they make decisions. And that's really powerful. That's a really helpful thing. So in video 1 of this sequence, I mentioned the idea of shared clarity of purpose. When people have shared clarity of purpose, what I said was that it's a neurological event. People are more cohesive, they're more motivated, and they're prepared to do stuff that otherwise they wouldn't be prepared to do without that shared purpose. But what constitutes shared purpose for human beings? Well, the answer is that people often try to create clarity in organisations with lists of tasks. Lists of tasks do not create clarity. What creates clarity in organisations is an understanding of outcomes. And you'll notice there's 5 to 7. Human beings in general can't hold more than 5 to 7 chunks of information in their brain at any one time. Yes, many can handle 9 or 10 or whatever, but the safest is to go for 5 to 7 chunks of information. And so clarity in an organisational sense is the outcomes that the organisation needs to achieve. Clarity in terms of the divisions or groups or whatever you want to call it is the outcomes that the group needs to achieve. And you cascade this right down to the individual outcomes. So clarity for an individual is, I know what I'm supposed to achieve and I know how that contributes to my team's outcomes. If you've got that, then you've got clarity. And clarity comes from simplicity. Clarity comes from brevity, and clarity comes from memorability. It doesn't come from 500 KPIs or KRAs or whatever you want to call them. It comes from simplicity. And certainly one of the things that causes people to be motivated to pursue a goal is where the goal is expressed in terms of outcomes. So they might be things like customer satisfaction. They might be things like profit. They might be things like efficiency, if that's measured. They might be things like the quality of solutions. They might be things like entering new markets. Whatever. As long as it's clear and it's measurable, then that will be motivational to people, and that's why you have clear purpose. That's also, by the way, why people love sport. At the end of a sporting match, you don't really have ambiguity in most cases. You've either won, lost, or drawn. And I think that's one of the reasons people love sport, apart from, of course, all the drama and theatre that you get in getting to that final point. So I suggest you define clarity of purpose in terms of outcomes, and you will increase the clarity of the people who are in your teams. Now, I want to show you a model for team development. And this model for team development is a model that's been abstracted from a bunch of neurological research throughout the years. This is based partially on Rock and Schwartz's model of the neuroscience of leadership. There's another version of this that's called GROW, but the acronym here, which draws pretty heavily on the neuroscience world, is called DROP: destination setting, reality checking, option creation, planning, doing, and reflecting. And what I'm suggesting is that if you think of Model 3 leadership, a facilitative style of leadership, I'm suggesting that this is a really powerful team development intervention, this activity. It can be done longitudinally. It doesn't have to be done as an event. In fact, it shouldn't be done as an event. It should be done over a period of time. So let me explain how this works. You can imagine a leader has 20 staff and he's trying to get them to coalesce into one team. What I'd be recommending is that that leader gets those 20 people into one room and leads them through a process where you will lead people through large group and small group activities. Split that 20 people into groups of, say, 4 each, 5 groups of 4, something like that, but lead them through the following exercises, because this ties together all of the components of what we've seen so far about what creates high levels of teamwork. Firstly, destination setting. Now, human beings are motivated by destinations. Change efforts often focus on the wrong thing. As I said earlier, focus has an enormous neurological impact on people. What people focus on turns on certain parts of their neural equipment, and therefore it turns off other parts of neural equipment. And when you focus on the future, it tends to turn on the new brain, it tends to turn on the prefrontal cortex, because that's the only part of the brain that can do this sort of task. And therefore it tends to turn off the old brain, so you get less activity out of the amygdala, and that means that you're going to get less negative emotions like anger, fear, and depression. Now, when you've done that, you've created a wonderful environment for creativity, energy, and collaboration. So a destination is a really powerful thing. In other words, in change management, don't try to get away from something. Paint a picture of an ideal future and make a plan about how to move towards that ideal future. And when I say paint a picture and create an ideal destination, don't do it yourself. Get your people to do it. Tell them the bits that are not negotiable, but cause them to create that destination. That way they'll be engaged in it, and that way they'll be motivated to pursue it. So I'm sure you'll be thinking that this is a people power way of doing things. And the answer is yes, it is a people power way of doing things. When people empower their staff to do this kind of stuff, they get a range of different benefits, but they also get high levels of enthusiasm, high levels of energy, but it also equips the staff to be more skilled in self-management. And I think that's an incredibly valuable objective. So a destination, in this case, is 5 words or phrases. The more tangible, the more effective, and if it's generated from the group, it will be engaged in. So you can imagine you split the group into small teams, you get them individually to write down 5 words or phrases, you get them to identify and discuss what those 5 words or phrases are, and then what you do is that you draw all of those results together and in effect get people to vote on the destination. And that causes people to have shared clarity, and they create enthusiasm by virtue of having been involved in this. And it harvests the neurological benefits that I mentioned earlier, things like cohesion, enthusiasm, creates an optimism and a focus on the future, and it creates esprit de corps. And now this is an entirely new brain activity. It's a new brain activity because of the fact that we're using the prefrontal cortex to do this. That's the only part of the brain that can do that. Then, once you've got your destination, which should be 5, 6, 7 words or phrases that describe where we want to be and some measures to measure whether that's happening or not, then you should undertake some kind of a reality check. Where are we now? So a reality check assessment may be as simple as just getting all of those 20 people to identify how close we are to this destination right now. 0 means as far as possible from it. 10 means we're perfect, nothing needs to change. Take the numbers and average them, and let's say it comes to a 4. In Australia and New Zealand, the average that's most common for an effective group is somewhere between, let's say, 7 and 8. Now, if you're getting a 4, that means that the team really needs to do some work in terms of bringing itself together to be a more effective team. But one of the beautiful things about this kind of measure is that from time to time, you can use this measure to be rechecked. So you ask the team to rate it out of 10, and okay, we were a 4 and now we're a 7, that's progress. All of those sorts of things can be valuable, but it teaches people to self-assess. The world of research into adult learning tells us that people don't tend to learn that well by simply being given feedback from a boss type or from a teacher. You are doing all right, you need to do better. What's most powerful in teaching people to learn is to teach them to self-assess. That's one of the greatest gifts that any teacher can give a student. Teaching them to self-assess, it's like teaching them to hunt or farm rather than simply needing to feed them. It makes them independent. Now, this process tends to make work groups more self-managing, and that's an outstanding objective to pursue. Self-assessment, incredibly powerful learning tool. Now, the value of reality checking is it creates a shared perception of how important the issue is. It creates a shared perspective of how much work we have to do. And once more, it's a new brain exercise. It will cause people to exercise their prefrontal cortex, and once more, you get the benefits of new brain emotions. Then, one of the most useful things that we can do for a team, you remember, of course, that I've said that corporate culture is behaviours. Well, one of the most powerful things that you can do in this exercise is to cause the team to create a behaviour protocol. Again, not top down, to create their own behaviour protocol. So the leader facilitates a process where each subgroup, so you've got 20 people, you split them into 5 groups of 4, each subgroup takes a flip chart, or if you're doing it electronically, maybe they create a document that they're going to share, and they write down the behaviours that they think will get the team to the destination. Behaviour management is an incredibly effective way of improving teams. Having shared behaviours and having a leader who's prepared to lead from those shared behaviours can be really, really powerful. And when you do this, you're creating a situation where, having split the group, identifying behaviours, record them, and then vote on them. And the behaviours that get the top votes, and usually in our experience that's between 7 and a dozen, well, they're our shared behaviours, and then you use those. You congratulate people on them, you redirect people on them, you use it peer-to-peer, top-down and bottom-up. And culture, as I've said, is behaviours. And then the final part of this activity in terms of the development is option creation. Now, we've talked about the behaviours that need to be undertaken in order to get us to the ideal team. But behaviours are not enough on their own. I mean, a behaviour is something that any individual can do. We need to plan things that we need to do as a group. What might those things be? Well, they might be we need to develop new systems. We need to develop new processes. We need to create something. We need to have different meetings. We need to have different forms of communication. When the group comes up with this idea, when the group comes up with these ideas, this creates an opportunity for you to gain the benefit of their intellectual input. And one of the things that we know is that you use a thing called synergy. Synergy is where people's decisions as a group are better than they would be if you just added up the individual decisions of each group member. So if you're able to do this, you will come up with much better solutions. Synergy is very powerful. Now, when you've created a range of options, what you can then do through brainstorming, we then capture all of these and once more we vote on them. But I think that what's really helpful from a creativity point of view is to do this exercise as a brainstorming activity where people do not get feedback about, well, that's a bit crazy or whatever. Any idea is a good idea. We make it clear to participants that we will decide after we've heard the ideas. And so this kills off traditional approaches, it generates genuinely new ideas. It's exciting, it's empowering, it causes people to think widely about the issue and how to reach the destination, and it also demonstrates open-mindedness from leaders. But then you vote, and we suggest that you give people some simple methodology about how they should consider these options. And an approach that's often used, I'm sure you've heard this is the value effort quadrant. So we look for things that are of high value and ideally easy. So high value and low effort, if you want to put it that way. So that's the low-hanging fruit. If you choose the low-hanging fruit, you can often get enormous immediate benefit because people start getting success very quickly, and what that means is that they're enthusiastic about progress and they feel good about the way things are going. But when people vote, you take these things and you agree on, let's say, 3 things to be committed to and formalize action points, a clear deliverable outcome, who needs to be involved in the sense of who will lead this and who will help that person, and then a time frame for completion. And then what you do is you come back and you revisit this. And so if we want to be a high quality team, what the research evidence suggests is we need to work on being a high quality team. It doesn't happen automatically, it happens through effort. Now, once you've done this, that's what this doing and reflection is all about. We'll pull out the list of action points from time to time, we'll redo the action planning exercise every so often, and it becomes a program of flexibility through empowerment, a new brain culture if you want to put it that way. Now, we have an action planning kit which we're happy to provide people with. If you want it, please don't hesitate to make contact with SACS and we will provide that for you, and you can use that as a sponsored job crafting or as a team development intervention framework. So to draw some conclusions, teamwork is a natural biological resource. Humans are hardwired for it. There are big advantages for staff in the organisation from being effective teams. You can recruit for teamwork. It's not just all about leadership, but of course you can build teamwork through leading effectively. Leadership is absolutely the key. Set a stated goal and plan for being a more effective team, and if you're able to use facilitative leadership to do this, that's best practice leadership, purely and simply because it will cause high levels of engagement, enthusiasm and positivity from staff. So that's the third in our series. Thanks very much for watching. If you're interested in further information, please click on the link below this video.